You're walking a route you know well. 2 days of easy ground between camp and good hunting. Then you come over a rise, and the river is wrong. Last month it was ankle deep and you crossed without thinking. Now it's brown and fast and carrying whole trees. You cannot see the bottom anywhere. Nobody in your group can swim. As far as the archaeological record can tell us, that sentence was probably true for most people for most of human history. Start with what a river costs. Not in danger, in time. A river you can't cross is a wall, and walls have to be walked around. So you follow the bank upstream, looking for a ford. A gravel bar, a braided stretch, somewhere the water spreads out and slows down. That might be 2 miles away. It might be 40. Rivers run shallower toward their headwaters, so the safe crossing is often far up into the hills. So the 2-day trip becomes a week. Or you wait for the dry season, for the flood to drop, for winter to lock the whole thing under ice. Ice may have been the great gift of the Ice Age. A frozen river is a road. Herds cross it, people cross it, and the barrier simply disappears. Then it thaws, and rotting ice is more dangerous than open water. Anyone who has lived near a spring breakup knows the sound of it giving way. So the map in your head isn't only places. It's places plus seasons, plus one bend that is knee-deep in August. Lose that, and the land closes. So could they swim? The honest answer is that we don't know, and most of the evidence we would want has no way of surviving. Start with the bodies. Drowning leaves no mark on a skeleton. No fracture pattern, no lesion, nothing a forensic anthropologist can read thousands of years later. Drowned people look like everybody else. So the deaths are invisible. What about the skill? For that we would want pictures, and Ice Age people drew constantly. Out of tens of thousands of images in European cave art, there is nothing anyone agrees shows a person swimming. No strokes, no floating figures, barely any water. The famous exception is in the Sahara. In 1933, the Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasy found a shelter in the Gilf Kebir, painted with small figures, limbs spread, apparently mid-stroke. It's called the Cave of Swimmers. It's Holocene, not Ice Age, and specialists still argue whether those figures are swimming, floating, dancing, or spirits moving through air. When the best candidate image is that ambiguous, the record is close to blank. And the earliest clear evidence isn't swimming at all. Assyrian palace reliefs from the 9th century BCE show soldiers crossing rivers gripping inflated animal skins. That's not swimming, that's floating, with equipment. Which raises the real problem, because we know for certain that people crossed serious open water long before anyone hollowed out a log. The proof is Australia. To reach it, you cross Wallacea, the island chain where Alfred Russel Wallace noticed the animals on either side were completely different. Sea level dropped enormously during the Ice Age. It never dropped enough. Even at the lowest, the shortest route still demanded open sea crossings of tens of kilometers. At Madjedbebe, a sandstone shelter in Kakadu, Chris Clarkson's team excavated stone tools and ground ochre, and dated the lowest layers to around 65,000 years ago. That date is contested. Some archaeologists think sand grains migrated downward through the deposit and dragged it too early. Even cautious readings put people in Australia by 50,000. Either way, the conclusion holds. Somebody moved a group of humans, including children, across water with no visible far shore, and enough of them to found a continent. You cannot do that by swimming. Not with children, not carrying fire kit, not against a current, not for tens of kilometers. Michael Bird and colleagues modeled the possible routes in 2019 and argued the crossings look deliberate, repeated, directed, and made by groups large enough to survive arriving. So there were vessels 65,000 years ago in tropical Asia, which leaves the question that makes this subject maddening. Where did every single one of them go? Nowhere. A raft is bamboo, cord, and lashings. In a warm, wet climate, all three are gone within a decade. No stone, no metal, no fired clay to survive. The oldest boat we actually have is the Pessa canoe from the Netherlands, a hollowed pine log about 10,000 years old, found during road building in 1955. It's roughly 3 meters long and looks too crude to work. Replicas do float, awkwardly, and it postdates the settlement of Australia by 50,000 years or more. The boats aren't missing because they weren't built. They're missing because fiber rots, and because those shorelines now sit under 100 meters of sea. What we have instead is indirect. Sue O'Connor's excavations at Jerimalai in East Timor produced tuna bones around 42,000 years old. Deep water fish, taken by people going offshore. And fiber, a 3-ply twisted cord, made by Neanderthals, preserved on a stone tool at Abri du Marat in France. Bruce Hardy's team published it in 2020. 3-ply cord is the whole trick. Twisted, it grips against itself. That is the difference between logs drifting apart and a raft you can actually steer. Rope and logs then. But can you genuinely cross open sea on that? A team in Japan decided to stop arguing about it and try. Yosuke Kaifu wanted to know how people reach the Ryukyu Islands. The gap from Taiwan to Yonaguni is over 200 kilometers, straight across the Kuroshio Current. His team built rafts from bamboo using only Paleolithic tools. The rafts floated. They could not beat the current. Too slow, too hard to steer. They simply drifted. In 2019, they tried a dugout canoe instead, cut from a cedar log with stone axes. 5 paddlers, no instruments, navigating by sun and stars. 45 hours to Yonaguni. That's the useful result. Not that it was easy. The crew described exhaustion and disorientation at night, but that it was possible with Stone Age materials. It also marks what archaeology can't settle, whether the first crossings were planned or accidental. Hominins reached Flores 1 million years ago, and a tsunami raft would explain that. My own reading. Deliberate for Australia, accidental for Flores. One crossing founded a continent-wide population. The other left a single, tiny, isolated species that eventually shrank and vanished. Which brings us back to swimming, and to what I think is the truer picture. Swimming is not an instinct. It's a taught skill, and cultures lose skills. Ethnography shows both extremes. Yagan women in Tierra del Fuego dived in near-freezing water to gather shellfish. Most European sailors of the 1800s couldn't swim a single stroke. So some Ice Age groups almost certainly swam well, and their neighbors one valley over almost certainly didn't. Neither leaves a trace. That's the part I find genuinely humbling. If you had to name one skill that decided where humans ended up, which islands, which valleys, which continents, water competence is a strong candidate, and it's invisible. What survives is the detour, the long walk upstream, the waiting for August, the generation that knew one shallow bend and handed it down like an heirloom. Next time a bridge carries you over a river in 8 seconds, that's what it replaced, not a swim. 2 weeks of walking and people who never crossed. There's more of this on the channel. The ordinary, exhausting parts of prehistory that left almost nothing behind, and what we can honestly reconstruct anyway.